Welcome to Loaded and Rolling. I'm Thomas Wasson, friendly neighborhood trucking expert here at FreightWaves and also host of the Loaded and Rolling podcast. But a lot of great things going on the F3 event. This is our super fun live edition, so we're going to be having two guests on the show today instead of one. So we're kicking it up the production value. And let's just dive right in. Speaking of our first guest, Mr. Jordan Kidd, head of product at Alvi's. And, you know, it's a really cool topic that you all have been working on, especially API and EDI. Because I remember when I started as working on the carrier side, there was such a common thing to become a broker, and you're like, oh, I finally got an EDI. I'm finally a big deal. So talk to us a little bit about yourself and what this EDI integration, why is it so important to get right?
Sure. So I'm Jordan Kidd, head of product at Alvis. Alvis is a carrier operating system, brokerage operating system. You can use the word TMS if you want to, but yeah, we've gone to the basic core part of your operation. So there's a lot of software out there that's kind of bolt on around the fringe of your things, plug into this, plug into that. But Alvis is a source of truth. It's the TMS, it's the operating system. And so we're focused on middle mile, so for carriers and brokers. And this year we've launched our native EDI integrations. Ooh. So instead of going through a third party, like most TMSs force you to go through a third party, or they're reselling some third parties, integration services and that sort of thing. And you have these long and expensive projects of mapping and setting up and testing and everything else. And you're forced to kind of just play the waiting game.
Yeah.
You sign up for, you win a bid with a new customer, and you can't even take the freight until you're set up with EDI, and you've got all this that you're waiting on third parties to prioritize your project. So Alvis is focused on providing that in-house, and so you got one point of contact for your for all your needs for your integrations, and it eliminates a lot of the friction around EDI and API. So we actually do both. We would love more people to do API, but it's just not reality. EDI is here for a while due to the shipper side and everything else, and maybe one day that'll change. But for now, we're stuck with EDI. It was kind of established in like 1957, I think.
Yeah, it's been around forever. That's what blows my mind with the EDI system, because a lot of the shippers are doing it, and like you said, that's such a tedious thing. You have to get with either your own team or their team or the third party, yep. And you never know when it finishes, because then they'll send the handshakes and they'll send the wrong info or the code's wrong.
Right.
And they're like, you're waiting for them to give you an example of their code to show what you do. I think that's such a big deal, because does that open the door to where, being a platform, you can then partner with the shippers and know that if you have a carrier you work with, we're going to help manage that and make it a little easier, because maybe the carrier doesn't even know where to start.
Exactly.
Go from there.
Exactly. And another thing you find is that a lot of shippers will send you a spec for their EDI connection, but their messages don't meet their spec. So, if you've got a third party involved, they set it up based on the spec, and then the production tenders come over and they don't even match spec, so you're having to go back, reopen the project, and all of that. So we're monitoring all that ourselves. We're monitoring the errors ourselves. And it's just like, it's so much more seamless that way, so much less friction, and much better experience for the carrier. Another thing that is unique about us doing EDI in-house is our ability to really get granular with the mapping. So let's just say, EDI 210 invoicing. No one wants to hear that, but
yeah.
But you got these charge codes, so you add a lumper fee or a layover or like a one-time, like reconsignment or whatever, and so you've got to map that charge code correctly. And because that fee is added within our system, we're able to do that filtering on the front end. So maybe your dispatcher adds a code that's not accepted by your customer, and then your biller has to go through and go through all these mismatches, and it was short paid, and you're dealing with like 60, 90 days down the line. Why was it short paid? Well, because we added a code that wasn't accepted and all this. So we do that right where the dispatcher's adding that code. We do the validation right there. I'm with shipper A. Do they accept this code? And if not, it won't let the dispatcher add the code to the load. right up front.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go back 60, 90 days later and deal with these short pays. And so it's just streamlining the whole process.
Because it'll cost more money to have. I always like to imagine that even a $300 tow new or a $50 detention, by the time you screw it up, and then you have to go to the account person, and the account person, how many hours are being used, and so that $50 charge now costed you $300 of the company's budget because you're having to go to these various ways. I think that's clever because a lot of folks don't dig into that kind of minutia, and it's something that. Like when I was an ops, I always knew someone else handled it.
Yep.
But then when I was an account executive, now they're bothering me about it. So I think that's really cool because that does open up, especially having EDI in-house, you're going to be able to understand shipper characteristics, their TMSs. So if you have a cluster of shippers using a certain system for their transactions, you can now utilize that instead of just each approaching as each new instance.
Yeah, 100%. And like you say, sometimes it's not, when you're dealing with 3 parties, it's just not even worth your effort to chase that extra $50. Where if you get it right on the front end, you're just increasing your revenue right there.
And the customer's not mad because then
Yeah.
you make the customer mad. The customer's like, "Why did you send me these charges?" And then you tell them, "Oh, I'm sorry, my EDI code's messed up." And then they get mad at you again, saying, "I sent you the paperwork. Why can't you figure it out?" Like, I think as a carrier, we are sleeping on the fact that facing these transactions, that can really mess with a relationship because you finally get on the RFP, and the next thing you know, you don't have your EDI set up, and your codes are all misfiring.
100%. Yeah. So another aspect is I think we've seen a lot of freight tech providers pop up that like I said at the beginning, they're all wanting to offer a sliver of your needs, and so when I came from the operations side, right, and I was dealing with 10, 15, 20 different providers and trying to manage the integrations between them all.
Ooh.
And, you start, I even heard the other day at a large carrier that said he had 70 integrations and multiple TMSs.
No. So when you update your system, that's the problem too, because what if the shipper or the carrier updates it? Doesn't that throw it all into array and you have to resend it?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving away from that tendency, which is easy to say, we'll integrate with you and integrate with you, we're bringing more and more of that in-house. So you got, a seamless workflow, and it's just so much better for our customers and carriers, shippers, brokers, having all that right there. So really excited about that, and it's opening up a lot of new, just streamlined processes for our customers.
Looking at the API side as well, you know, EDI has been kind of the standard. Some may say gold, some may say bronze if you mess it up, but convincing them to move towards an API. Is that something where, having the experience, is that kind of like a selling point and a value add where you can go to the customer and say, look, I know I'm working with you on these carriers, I know we're doing EDI, but if you want to work with me on this, I can get you an API. Is that also a possible route to get it and make it easier on everyone?
Absolutely. So we're seeing basically you used to come as a carrier to a shipper and you say, hey, I want to connect over EDI, and they would say, okay, is it AS2 or FTP? Yeah. And so those are the two options. And we're starting to see API as a third option. And our workflows are built to where it's agnostic to the user. They don't know whether this is AS2, FTP, SFTP, API. It's a seamless workflow. It's streamlined just the same way, regardless of which backend you're using. And we have error alerts and confirmations, and you can view the whole history of all the transactions right there, so that they say, well, you never sent us that accept tender or the 210 or whatever it may be, or the 997. You can just open up the history right there, and you don't have to go to a third-party platform to see if the message was sent, because we're the ones sending the message, so it's right there in the platform.
Is that something as well? Because I know a lot of times when you did EDI batch tenders, you still have to, oftentimes a person on the back end still has to review it and sometimes plug and play. Is that kind of the opening and the opportunity as you're developing this tech to where if I get a batch of 40 for a project, I'm plugging in the TMS, it's going to give me a heads up with some spots saying, hey, look, we used to see this stuff, but I need you to review it. Is that kind of one of the options? Because I remember some poor rep, I'd still get an EDI set, and I'm like going back, I'm like, what's the point? Why couldn't it fill in the blanks right?
Absolutely. So we look at address mismatches. For example, they may send you an address that's not even like a validated address, right? So we're doing the lookups and we're saying, okay, this address is not quite valid. We think this is the valid one. You already have this location, and we're doing that fuzzy matching right there. So again, that's something that you wouldn't get if you're going to a third party. And then you'd have to have someone in the loop managing those connections and those mappings, where in-house we're able to do all that behind the scenes without anyone having to
And that
manage
just
it.
costs more because now I think that's why the third-party EDI folks really enjoy that part, because now you're coming back to me and I can say, well, the customer sent it wrong. I'm going to need another like few $100s of labor. And then you go back and then if you under. So I think that's something that a lot of folks are sleeping on, because I can't imagine. I had to deal with it with an internal dev team, and we were having to go back and forth. And that felt like pulling teeth, because even between a carrier and a shipper communication, like it could be, if they didn't have if they weren't familiar with their process.
Yep. And so another thing I wanted to point out is we actually have I mentioned that we're a carrier and a broker TMS, but we've focused on this hybrid component where a lot of folks do both. They share loads between their carrier and brokerage side. And in a lot of cases, TMSs will make you EDI your loads back and forth to yourself. So if it was sent, over to your carrier side, and you're going to, let brokerage handle that one, you got to like EDI it across to your other side in a lot of cases. Well, we cut that whole part out, and we have a seamless hybrid workflow. So you can just, in 2 clicks, you can move that load from carrier to brokerage or vice versa. And then we have really granular filtering for visibility. So as an admin or an ops manager, you may want to see both sides of the house. But you may want your carrier dispatchers not to see the brokerage loads and vice versa. And so at each level, you can manage the filtering and the responsibility, of those different business units.
Yeah.
Seamlessly within the one platform.
You just flip a SCAC and just change the SCAC code?
Yeah, exactly. So the tender will show what SCAC it was issued to, and then you can show that, like, internally, you can flip the SCAC code on who's fulfilling it. Yeah.
That's cool. I did one where we had a similar situation, but it was the assets in-house TMS was different than their brokerage TMS.
Right.
And so you're having to push them through, and it would get lost. Like, that's clever on one platform, because I'd want to monitor it. Right now, if I'm the ops guy, if you're trying to take the broker loads and say, oh, I need to put them on my truck.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
looking forward, got a little bit of time left. Anything on the horizon as we're moving out? Any cool developments folks should keep an eye on, especially in the EDI space, API, and like kind of what you're working on?
Yeah, we're working on a lot of refinements to the process, and rules-based transactions to where maybe you always want to accept. Maybe your trucks always get stuck in let's just say Chicago right now, and so any EDI tender from that area we want to auto accept. Some of these types of things that just to further automate the workflows and streamline them. We've got a lot of things coming on that. We've got a lot of development happening on a lot of fronts. Dispatch planners. Just tons of different modules that we're working on all at the same time. So really excited about what we're doing.
Looking forward to it. If folks want to learn more about Alvis or get in contact, what's the best way to find out?
Yeah, well, we've got a booth here, and then alvis.com is our website, and we got a great sales team out there, and just hit us up. We're building the TMS of tomorrow for you today. So
love it. Thanks for your time, sir.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, a lot of great stuff going on. You can check them out, Alvis. They got the booth over there as well, and their website. So give them a look. EDI stuff's important. I remember dealing with the error codes. My favorite trick was I would purposely change the codes, and so if there was a delay, I could try to scrub it and look better on the guide, and then the shipper doesn't think I'm bad. But let's bring in our next guest here, talking about auditing, invoicing, cash flow. That's a big deal because it has sunk a few companies, not mentioning any, but Eric Kruger, president and co-founder at Navix. Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and Navix as well.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Eric Kruger, president and co-founder of Navix. Navix is primarily working with 3PLs and brokerages to automate, whether it be auditing, discrepancy management, document collection, as well as invoicing capability. And when you really think about that across this ecosystem, right, between the shipper all the way to the end carrier and or vendor, this process is what creates the lag in terms of the ability to get bills out accurately to customers, reduce rebills, reduce short pays, and ultimately find ways to you know, I'd say prevent those from occurring in the future, right? So then the data becomes gold to these companies, whether it be for submitting RFPs, carrier selection, carrier scorecarding, what am I actually charging to my customer and ultimately paying to my carrier.
Well, I think there's a cost as well, because not only is there a cash flow issue if you're billing it wrong, you're invoicing it wrong, but then you just land a customer in this market, and now they're saying, wait, why are you asking me for this again? Like, is that one of the things as well, that if you're not doing it right and you're not automating it, that can get you in trouble?
It does. We actually get brought into a lot of opportunities because someone just lost a massive shipper, and part of it's because they just can't bill correctly, and what that does is it just tarnishes that relationship altogether. And not only does it slow down the cash, but it won't allow people to think that you are actually doing your job as a freight brokerage or a 3PL to that shipper.
And looking at, there's a great concept, days sales outstanding, DSO.
Yeah.
I think that's such a cool topic because I'm used to aging, so I'm looking at aging stuff, trying to haggle for money and stuff, which was always a thorn. But talk about DSO, and how is it a big deal right now? Because I feel like that's one of the hidden things no one is talking about, which is the getting paid part, and how many days?
Yeah, so days sales outstanding, it's pretty much, you're on net terms with a lot of these shippers in terms of, let's say, net 30, but it ultimately takes you post-delivery of the load to get that bill out, let's say, by 5 days. So that technically your DSO in that scenario would be when you actually collect the cash after that delivery occurs. And in today's market, it's become even more important, right? Line of credit, interest rates are at highs over, here in the last 10 years. So if you're at any point having to pull on a line associated with cash that you're not collecting because you still have to pay the carrier, it creates a massive problem. We see that, not only is it important for the broker, but it's important to get that information quickly and accurately to the shipper, and it also helps you with your carriers if you're able to pay on time, right? And so all of these parts connect, but days sales outstanding is, it's funny sometimes you talk to some of these brokerages, and even though you say cash is king and cash flow, and you start talking about DSO, and a lot of them, I would say, maybe necessarily all have a different way of measuring this, and maybe sometimes don't even at times know how to measure it, right? So it's quite an interesting conundrum that it's so important, and it's the lifeblood of these brokerages and 3PLs, but it truly is kind of one of those mythical aspects. But I'd say the really good brokerages and 3PLs that we work with they're watching that like a hawk.
Yeah. They're trying to collect. And I always wondered that because I've had some customers, when it becomes easy to find capacity, they will purposefully go from a net 30 and when I need the truck, now I'm a net 60 and net 90. Is that something where with the tech and the automation, is that going to open up another door because it's automated? I'm sending it. I'm not calling you. It's nothing personal. It's just a friendly reminder.
Well, it definitely opens up a door in both directions. So like, let's say with the shipper, well, how quickly and how fast you can get your bills out to that specific shipper and the level of complexity there. But at the same time, with the carrier and your carrier network, you start to identify that maybe I was saving money when I originally booked this load with this carrier, or it was a lower rate. But ultimately, it takes you, let's say, 10 days to get your paperwork or the required backup from that carrier. Well, maybe that, in terms of cash flow impact, is actually not benefiting the brokerage. And so you might go and say, I'm going to maybe pay a higher rate, but I know that this carrier is reliable in getting my information to me accurately and quickly, and ultimately allows them to bill their customer quicker, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different angles there, but it impacts across this entire ecosystem from the shipper all the way to that carrier.
I feel like that's something not often discussed. I really like that concept because I never considered it either, even from a trucking side. Which carriers are actually submitting it? Because I remember getting PODs from drivers. I'm like, hey, can you send it? Can you send it?
Factoring companies, drivers, is it the dispatcher? Where's the best and most appropriate path to receive that paperwork or that required information to process this? And so you have to meet these carriers and these vendors where they're at, and you have some of the larger LTL carriers that have APIs and EDI is what they primarily utilize, and then you go all the way to little mom and pop trucking companies, and it's a span and a range of different ways and means in which you can collect that. And I think remaining agnostic and allowing, if the goal is speed and accuracy, we're not going to ask a carrier to do something unique to work with a customer, and why would a broker or 3PL do that as well?
Yeah.
So
You want a fun story? There was one at a large carrier. The drivers would transflow them, and this is a multi-billion-dollar mega carrier. So the drivers would save them up till the end of the week, and they would transflow. So you're waiting on Monday, and you're already at like day 4 or 5, and this driver would also save some from last week because they don't get paid until they transflow the documents. So I can only imagine a headache from auditing, processing it, that not only the broker has to collect from the customer and timely pay the carrier immediately, so there's one crunch, but then on the back end of the crunch, how am I going to get that to even send it up?
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think what's really important is it's more about being proactive than reactive in this environment. And I think as soon as you start to have data then that can drive, these conversations, whether it be from a carrier sales perspective or maybe even directly with the shipper, why do you keep sending in the wrong dimensions or, FAK, tied to the class of your freight? We're always having to touch it on the back end side, and now I have this data, I can have that type of conversation. So we see that that's even more important, is just to have the visibility into what's occurring so you can be proactive about resolving that discrepancy dispute operationally before it even occurs.
And it feels very reactive right now. I feel like the industry has accepted this reactivity, time to go call for the money, time to go call for the invoice. And so that's where the tech is. Like looking forward in the outlook, that's kind of what you want to have, is a platform that's preemptively giving you a heads up. Do everything, with automation, AI, I know it's a buzzword, but will that allow me to eventually finally find my problem carriers and shippers, even to the granular driver level, so I can call Bob and say, stop hoarding your stuff, send it, please transflow it, or whatever you got to do.
Yeah, exactly. And we see all the time, people are, companies that we're working with, they're like, the load shows delivered and it just sits on an aging report, and then they wait maybe even 7 days before, and they give the carrier, let's say 7 days to send in or submit that paperwork. Well, those 7 days, that impact then back to DSO and cash flow automatically hits. So why not just start being proactive, knowing where to go, identify how to collect that information to get that bill out to the customer.
And I think even from a brokerage level as well, the average reps are not thinking about the value of the velocity. Like if having the visibility now, you can possibly adjust it and give them an incentive to say, look, it's one thing, I'm glad you sold this load, you got me $100, but I only made $25 because you waited to even collect it from the carrier. I would love that, because I got so much pushback, and you're asking them and they don't understand. They're like, well, I sold the load. And it's like, but how are you going to get your receipt paid for?
Well, that actually hits on a whole nother point that we can dive into, but there's the cradle to grave methodology, and then there's also more of a centralized billing and AP/AR processing. And we see all the time that, well, that's a load rep, or that's the carrier sales, responsibility to track down this missing backup when it's not sent in. And it's like, don't you think that there could be more value driven by that person, let's say, going and selling the next load, going and actually creating a stronger relationship with rather than doing the paper chase, right? I think we see that all too often, that this paper chase mentality, it lives in multiple different organizations. It's I know maybe who or how to get that, and that becomes a big challenge altogether.
And that's what I think, even on the carrier and brokerage side, it feels like the accounting team, not having the tech and having that kind of interaction, it always feels like more of a negative thing now instead of a proactive, please get this in, please get this in. I think that's a big thing. Like we saw with some of these large digital brokerages, if you don't have that ability to quickly move it, it only takes 2 or 3 good weeks to sync carrier, and it can certainly do that for a broker.
100%. And especially in this market where, cash is tight everywhere. And so you just need to be super conscious of this and identify ways in which you can speed this process up. It gives you information as well to possibly go renegotiate with your shippers or renegotiate with your carrier partners on whether it be terms or other items, simply based off of now knowing the typical time it takes to process when you've continually booked specific loads with carriers.
Yeah, get an incumbent status, you pay quickly, and you get it going. But running low on time, Eric, folks want to learn about Navix as well, get in contact or even check out the booth. What's the best way to find out?
Yeah, so just visit us at www.navix.io. We have a few folks here running around the show. Happy to meet up with anyone there, or reach out on LinkedIn as well. Yeah, that's probably the best way to get a hold of us.
Perfect. Looking forward to it. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
That's going to be a wrap for this show, but if you're just joining us, we're going to make it into a podcast on and Spotify. Don't cut my audio just yet. I see you in the back. We're also going to be here at the event. You can always check it out. I'll be at registration, so go look for me. I get around. But moving forward, every Tuesdays, you want to check out the podcast. It is usually Tuesdays at 1 p.m. We also have a newsletter, freightwaves.com/loaded-and-rolling. Get some trucking insights into your inbox. That's a wrap for today. A lot of more content coming up here at the F3 event in Chattanooga. I'll look for you there. Join us next week. We'll do it live.